After a whirlwind experience with their colleagues in Gaza and traveling home for over 30 hours, the group returns tired but enthused by the fact that they were helpful. Here is what some of them had to say.
We have had a fascinating adventure going to Gaza and meeting the wonderful people in Gaza, serving and learning. Our physicians took care of patients. Our humanitarian people met all people all over Gaza. We're very thankful, and now our job is to try to help the international community make a commitment to freeing the people of Gaza.
I've been going to the Middle East since 1985. I've been there 6 times to the Gaza Strip. I was part of Free Gaza movement a year ago, the 2 boats that went in and broke a 41-year-old maritime siege, and this is my first time back to Gaza since then. So I'm assessing the war is not the right word, the assault, the effects of the assault that occurred last winter. I spent most of my professional time at Al Auda Emergency Room in Jabalia refugee camp in the Gaza Strip. That's the largest refugee camp in the Middle East for Palestinians. It has 100,000 people and over 4,000 people per square kilometer, so it's extremely congested.
This was my 4th trip into Gaza, and what was different this time was that we ended up working directly with patients and with our colleagues in medical settings for 4 of the 5 days that we were there in Gaza. I had an opportunity to meet in each of the 3 outpatient psychiatry clinics that are operated by the Gaza Community Mental Health Program.
The last time we were there, Gaza was imprisoned but not under siege, and now under siege, and just having had the war on them in December and January, their ability to feed themselves and work and educate themselves and find clean water is remarkably diminished. All the primary aspects of life are wanting.
Overall, I think I titled this trip From Horror to Hope. The whole notion of our going there was to be colleagues to our colleagues, to bring some notion that the outside world knows and cares about what's happening in Gaza. We heard over and over again that the adults can't leave, they can't get permits, they can't get out, so the sense of being trapped, the sense of being in an outdoor prison was everywhere. On the other hand, the weather was nice for part of the time. There were people that were busloads of kids from the schools going to the beach, and people just sort of carrying on. So it was a huge set of contrasts. We'll have to spend some time figuring out what we really feel and think about this. Hopefully what we can do is get the United States government to go and talk to them, not to shun them, not to say that we're not going to talk to you.
I saw patients in the Al Auda hospital in the refugee camp, Jabalia refugee camp also, and had great admiration for the physicians working under adverse and even impossible situations with very little support because they had completely closed off the supply system from Israel and the rest of the world, so that patients were trapped when they needed open heart surgery and various procedures that could only be had in the West Bank. It was difficult and often impossible to get out. One example is that a patient that I saw needed open heart surgery, but his cousin or some distant relative had once been in an Israeli prison for a period of time, and that automatically disqualified this gentleman for being able to get out of the Gaza and into the West Bank. So it was both disheartening and heartening to see the efforts being made on the count of very professional and well educated physicians trying to keep up the care of patients in a very, very difficult situation. I'm glad I went, and my heart continues to go out to those patients and physicians.
What was most striking to me was the extent of trauma this time around with the Israeli attack on Gaza in December and January. It appeared that the vast majority of folks living there in Gaza had been affected by somebody injured or somebody killed. A number of homes in the range of 3,000 to 4,000 had been completely destroyed, and something upwards of 15,000 homes had been somehow or another damaged. So there was a huge amount of trauma that people were describing. I had a colleague, for example, telling me that with his small kids in the range of 4 to 8 years old, huddling with the children as bombs were being exploded within 20 yards of the house, up to 200 yards from the house. And I asked him, how did you help your kids to get through this? And he said initially that they were just terrified, and that then he thought to have the kids start to clap, make their own noise. And so they started clapping, and pretty soon they were laughing at the same time that the bombs were also going off, so that the kids seemed somehow or another to be able to find some solace with their dad in this situation. So many of the kids that we talked to, this wasn't the case. They would see children and adults killed or injured, and then attempt to go back to school. There were kids in the schools at the time that some of the bombs fell who wouldn't go back to school, and so on. So it was a hugely traumatized population that, on the other hand, showed some extraordinary capacity just to keep going. We were welcomed in so many open-armed ways by so many people that it really made it feel like they were just extremely glad to have somebody from the outside coming in. Mental health of the population in Gaza it's remarkably good under the circumstances, but there's very, very widespread depression. Post-traumatic stress by the studies meet full criteria for 15% of the folks in Gaza, and very significant levels of traumatic stress for 80, 90, perhaps 100% of the folks there. Really, nobody has been left untouched by the way in which the country is locked in and then assaulted by F-16s and Apache helicopters and so on. And then the food supplies are restricted. All of the sort of luxury items are restricted. There's really a very tight hold on Gaza by the Israelis, with the Egyptians in control of the southern border, cooperating with the Israelis on not allowing anything but just basic United Nations required food supplies to come in, and those at relatively limited levels. There are tunnels that folks have been digging from Rafah at the very south end of Gaza into Egypt, and so there is some clandestine commerce, but it's wide open. The Israelis will bomb those periodically, and they can close them down at any time. So there's this sense of being completely controlled from the outside and just doing the best that they can.
I found kind hearts there. I found a general surgeon who showed me graphic footage of war casualties, including what drone attack victims look like, what white phosphorus victims look like. It was horrifying. But I saw a hospital called Al-Wafa Rehabilitation Hospital where that took multiple artillery shells to the hospital, and it was horrifying. And the American public needs to know about this.
North Americans, I believe, need to work with their congresspeople to awaken a different spirit of changing our attitude toward how Gaza can be set free.
The average North American can say that it's important that we not allow the kind of continuous occupation to continue. This is a country under occupation, and in Gaza in particular, where the borders are closed, it is, I believe, it's a violation of human rights, a violation of international law, and the United States has been party to this. The United States at least acquiesces in this. There are huge parallels here. I think we have to recognize that what Israel did in December, January, the kind of military assault on a country that really had no defense, was very much like what the United States did in 2003 in Iraq. Shock and awe really is shock and awful, shock and horrible in both places. And both countries, Israel and the United States, I think are guilty of perpetrating on relatively unarmed people extraordinary violence that I believe is egregious and needs to be called to account. The people of the United States need to stand up and say, not in our name.
To find out more about the Physicians for Social Responsibility and this trip to Gaza, you can visit their website at www.psr.org/chapters/Washington. You can also voice your opinion on this issue by going to our nowpolling.ca website and looking for Israel under federal polls. Remember, participation is the essence of direct democracy.